Welcome into Eye on Northeast Kansas, the podcast. This is where we recap some of the top interviews you've seen on Eye on Northeast Kansas, the TV show. It comes to you live Monday through Friday, 4 o'clock Central Time, streaming from our WIBW studios in Topeka, Kansas. As always, I'm your host, Melissa Bruner. We have had a couple rough weeks again in Topeka when it comes to crime. Of course, last fall, we spoke quite a bit about the number of homicides that we were seeing in a short period of time. The trend kind of turned, and we did have a fairly quiet start to the year, and then we had a string of 3 homicides within 2 weeks. Shawnee County District Attorney Mike Kagay visited the show this week, and he lent a little insight into just what might be behind the trends, what trends he's seeing, if any, and we also touched a bit on Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Appreciate you being here.
And thanks for having me back.
We did have a slow start, if you might say, crime-wise, violent crime-wise, after the fall trouble and turbulence that we saw. Now we've had 3 homicides in the past 2 weeks. Are there any trends that we can point to among these that might perhaps be causing this increase? Or is there really an increase? Is this just a natural ebb and flow?
You know, I think it's more the latter, Melissa. What we've seen historically in this community and really around the state and the country is violence tends to ebb and flow. There are a number of factors that go into that. And when we look at these last 3 cases in particular, I can tell you that there's no correlation or connection between the 3 individually. I can tell you that one of them is still under investigation. I anticipate we'll be getting a presentation from the Topeka Police Department very soon on that. And we filed charges on the other 2. Both defendants are being held on $1 million bonds. They're both facing very serious charges. And they'll have scheduling hearings in June. On both those cases.
Is there anything about these cases that points to a larger risk for the public? In other words, was there anything random about them that people should be concerned?
Well, that's the last piece here, is that in both of these cases, and it's been my experience by and large in the vast majority of these cases, the parties were known to each other. So the victim and the offender were known to each other. These weren't happenstance. This wasn't a random act of violence from a stranger in a dark alley, right? So I don't think there's a threat to the public at large. If there was, I'd be the first person to say so.
We also have the Kansas Bureau of Investigation looking into an officer-involved shooting from over the weekend. The KBI said that they try to get reports to you within 30 days. Do you have an update yet on what point that investigation is at? Have you heard anything from the KBI at this point? And how does that process unfold?
Yeah, so how it unfolds historically is I receive a phone call notification, usually from the chief of police or the sheriff, depending on which agency is involved. They let me know there's been an officer-involved shooting. I respond to the scene. I respond to the LEC. I get a briefing on what's happening. I get a preliminary review of what we know at the time. And then I make sure I can review any Axon body camera footage that's available. I review that. And then it really goes on 2 different tracks. So the KBI is doing the investigation on the officer-involved shooting, and I think that's appropriate. I've met with them. I've met with their investigative team. They have my information. We'll be in communication throughout the 30-day window. And my experience with them has always been consistent, that within that 30-day timeline, they are presenting a full, thorough investigation to my office, and then we start our internal review. On the other side of things, TPD is free to investigate any criminal charges that could be considered against the suspect in this case.
Okay, so we'll keep our ears open for any updates on that. April Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We have some other guests today who are going to talk a bit more about that topic, but when it comes to your office, what do you want people to know about sexual violence and the role of the prosecutor and how you can help them?
I would say a few things are important to emphasize here. The first is that sexual violence almost always occurs between people that are known to each other, and that's a very uncomfortable truth. And when it comes to children in particular, it's someone that the parents trust because this person has access to their child in a one-on-one setting. And so people don't want to consider that. They don't want to think about that. They have a responsibility to do that. The next is how much we care about these types of cases and how hard we're willing to fight for our victims, for our survivors, to get them justice. And I would encourage them to make those reports, to tell someone they trust. And for the person who receives that disclosure, that is an honored position, and they have a responsibility to handle it accordingly. And I would say encourage them to follow through.
You're going the extra mile to support the youngest victims of sexual violence and child abuse by supporting the Lifehouse Heroes campaign. More on that later in the show today as well, but I will let you give a little plug. You have something fun tomorrow that you're doing to raise money.
Yes.
What can people do?
Yeah, so we did this last year, and we're going to do it again this year. If people want to throw water balloons at me, they have an opportunity tomorrow at Evergy Plaza between 11:30 and 1:30. Come on out, make a donation to Lifehouse, throw a couple water balloons. It's a fun time.
It's fun. He's willing to take it for him.
This is a face made to be hit by water balloons.
Evergy Plaza tomorrow, and we'll have more on Lifehouse Heroes in a bit. Mike, thank you so very much. Appreciate what you do and the work of your office and the update.
Thank you, Melissa.
That fundraiser for Lifehouse Child Advocacy Center has wrapped up. However, the issue does remain very vital and their work continues. So you can visit the Lifehouse Child Advocacy Center website. Just give them a search and you can find a way to support their work there. They deal with the youngest victims, but of course, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and we've been fortunate to have Michelle McCormick, the executive director of the Kansas Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence, work with us to shine some light on various aspects of this issue. She recently also was joined by Rachel Grollmes of the YWCA Center for Safety and Empowerment, and they took a look at some of those underlying root causes when it comes to sexual violence and what we can do about them.
Welcome to both of you. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
How prevalent, first of all, Rachel, when we talk about sexual violence, how prevalent is it?
Yeah, so we know in Kansas that 15% of women and 2% of men ages 18 and older have experienced unwanted sex. And when we look at that on the national level, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced sexual violence, and 1 in 2 transgender and gender nonconforming people have experienced sexual violence in their lifetimes.
What I was going to ask, are there any populations that it's more prevalent among, who maybe is more at risk, so to speak?
Absolutely. So transgender folks, especially trans and gender nonconforming people of color, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and in Kansas, adults who identify as lesbian, gay, and bisexual experience sexual violence at 3.2 times higher than that of folks who are not.
When we look at root causes then, Michelle, is there anything that knowing these populations that seem to have higher rates can be done to explore what can be done to protect them?
Yeah, absolutely, right? So what we want folks to know is that we know that anyone who has a vulnerability, even though anyone can experience sexual violence, we know that folks who have vulnerabilities are disproportionately impacted. And so we would ask folks to really consider how, if we help folks be better connected to their communities, better connected to supports, regardless of that area of vulnerability, that we think then we can help prevent these acts from happening to them, but also help them, if they are victimized, get access to resources and support.
Those resources and support are important because after someone has been a victim, then what do we see? There are other things that this can lead to, correct?
Correct. So it leads to higher rates of depression and other mental health issues, as well as physical issues too.
Which is incredible to think about. Higher rates of heart disease, asthma, stroke, all from being a victim of sexual violence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a really great book that is called The Body Keeps the Score, and it really captures sort of what happens is that when folks experience trauma, it isn't just sort of psychological, the harm that they experience. We really process it in our bodies. And so there's a lot of great research that shows folks have higher rates of heart disease, they are more vulnerable to strokes, all kinds of physical impacts because they've been traumatized.
What other health inequities or health equity issues can play into whether someone might be more at risk for sexual violence or set them up to perhaps be victimized?
Racism absolutely plays a key role in that. So when somebody experiences multiple levels of oppressed identities, then when those come together, it can lead towards more adverse health outcomes and also, as we said, more at risk for sexual violence.
You talked a little bit last time as well, Michelle, about just attitudes that people have in society.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the prevention approaches that we know is effective is to help change our social and cultural norms, right? So if we can help folks look at what we call the isms, right? Racism, sexism, ableism, classism, all of these sort of different categories where folks can experience vulnerability, then really we can try to prevent folks from being harmed. And so
all very important, and these are things that they touch on at the YWCA of Northeast Kansas and at KCSTV. Resource information will be on WIBW.com. Also important to know that there are ways you can get help if you need it. Thanks to both of you. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That campaign for Lifehouse Child Advocacy Center has wrapped up, but of course the issue remains and their work continues, so visit their website to find ways to continue their support. Unfortunately, sexual violence doesn't just impact adults. The sad reality is that often children are victims. Michelle also visited us with Ginny Samples and Danielle Armitage. They are with SOS Inc. That's an organization based in Empora, Kansas, and serving Lyon and surrounding counties. They took a look at some of the ways children can be victimized and how all of us play a role in preventing it.
Welcome to all of you. So glad you could be here. You know, when we talk about kids, Michelle, you say that we all can do something. I mean, what are some of those things that we can do?
Yeah, absolutely. We're interested in helping folks really understand that we think this issue is preventable. And so there are a number of strategies. There are some strategies that happen at the individual level, like doing education with kids, education with families, community members to help them understand the risks and then how to respond to that. But we also think about larger societal level solutions. And so, for example, I don't think a lot of folks think about the fact that access to safe and affordable childcare is actually a sexual violence prevention strategy. We know there's a correlation between those two things because if children can have access to safe and affordable childcare, then they aren't maybe put in situations where a parent has to make a desperate choice about who cares for the child, which of course creates some vulnerability for exploitation.
Well, and as we heard the DA say, a lot of times this happens, most times parents know the perpetrator. What is the main message that you spread through SOS, Danielle?
I think one of the most important things is getting kids to really understand the gut feeling that they have when they feel unsafe, is being able to talk to someone about it and have those conversations. If they feel sick, it's time to talk to someone and let them know that something doesn't feel right.
At what age should you start those conversations?
We usually start them like around preschool, kindergarten, usually kind of at the latest, because I think, you know, if you talk basic enough to them, they can understand when I don't feel good, I need to get help. They usually know if they're sick. And so we talk a lot about that sick feeling is also one that when I feel uncomfortable, that's something that I have too.
And Ginny, what services can SOS provide then if something unfortunate does happen to be able to support the children and the families through this?
Right, so SOS has a child advocacy center, and we are there for the victims of child abuse, whether that be sexual abuse or, you know, violence, witness to violence. They can come in with DCF refers them, or law enforcement will refer them to our center, and we work through those things with the family. The child will do a forensic interview, and it is in a child friendly setting. So it is, you know, we try to make it as most comfortable as we can to reduce that trauma risk. And then we work through that with the family, and, you know, maybe that's helping with, you know, therapy pieces or, you know, whatever that family may need and what services they may need. We are there with them the entire time.
How vital is that support for kids? Because I think sometimes people forget that component. It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to seek justice for the child, we're going to have a trial, the perpetrator is going to be brought to justice and sentenced. Then what happens?
Right. I mean, I think that having that support for those children, you know, they want to lean on, they need someone to lean on, but not just the child as well as the family. The whole entire family needs that support and that advocacy. And I think that we can provide that with them even after everything is over, to make sure that they're okay, to make sure they're receiving the services that, you know, they need in order to deal with what they've gone through.
And that's a reminder at any age, Michelle, I think that you find through your work, that you found through your advocacy work over the years, that there's some trauma involved and that can continue long after a trial is over.
Absolutely. You know, we definitely see children process that trauma as they hit developmental stages. They can understand what happened maybe a little differently, and so there might be more things to process. And so definitely one of the realities is that survivors often have to continue processing this trauma. It, you know, doesn't have to define their life, but it definitely can be an ongoing process for people.
Danielle, what counties does SOS serve?
SOS serves Lyon, Coffee, Chase, Morris, and Osage County.
And Osage County. Yes. And I asked that because we're going to talk about an organization that serves Shawnee County here in just a minute. So how can people support SOS and the work in those areas of our state?
I think one of the ways they can do that is just being able to allow us to come in and have conversations and talk to, you know, kids, families, anybody really, to understand that it starts with all of us, actually. You know, like, we all have to have the conversations to be able to get kids to understand how to stay safe and we need to know what to do when they come to us.
And the point about childcare is so true. You know, you just never know. So here are some resources for you. The statewide hotline for sexual and domestic violence, 888-363-2287. Also, you can reach KCSDV at their website, and you can have resources there. And then SOS in Empora, they're at 800-825-1295, and their website is soskansas.com. You all are doing some very important work, and we appreciate you being here to touch on this part of the sexual assault awareness issue. Thank you so much.
There are so many facets of sexual assault awareness, and Michelle will continue to be joining us to talk about them. And we have resource information posted on WIBW.com when you take a look at these segments. April also is Alcohol Awareness Month, and drawing and shining light on various aspects of mental health is the point of WIBW TV's Hear Me, See Me campaign. Alcohol misuse is listed as a mental health disorder. Brad Sloan of Vallejo Behavioral Health and Kristen Shook with Mirror Inc. visited Ion Northeast Kansas to shed some light on the connections between alcohol use and misuse and mental health.
April is Alcohol Awareness Month. Advocates use this time to raise understanding and offer support. While alcohol abuse has physical components, it's also recognized as a mental health disorder. Kristen Shook is with Mirror Inc. out of Topeka and Lawrence and other locations around the state. And Brad Sloan is the detox program manager at Vallejo in Topeka. They're both here to help us explore that a bit, so we thank you for that. And I think that mental health component is something a lot of people don't really realize or understand. What is the link that you see, Kristen, between helping folks who are dealing with alcohol use disorders and mental health?
So a lot of times it seems that individuals who are consuming alcohol are doing so to kind of get away from their everyday life or to minimize some of those stressors, and in hopes of that is to help their mental health. So mental health, in my opinion, is a lot of the underlying reasons that individuals do consume alcohol and other substances.
How can it also, Brad, be connected to maybe some other mental health issues that are going on?
Well, we see a lot of folks that use, as Kristen suggested, that use alcohol as a coping mechanism to deal with mental health issues that are underlying any addiction issues that they might be dealing with at that particular time. So a lot of the folks that we work with at Vallejo have co-occurring disorders. They have an addiction disorder as well as a mental health disorder, both of them diagnosed in the DSM. And so we find ourselves having to address both issues at the same time. A lot of times people will, their mental health issues will be more at the forefront, more symptomatic. Sometimes their addiction issues are more symptomatic. And so you have to kind of balance that and weigh that out as you're treating the individual.
How do you help the individual, Kristen, understand that connection in order to help them on the next step to recovery?
So there are quite a few programs and things that you go off of when you are assisting somebody in that. And during the process, you are allowing them to learn a lot about themselves and a lot about their traumas, and then giving them tools and resources to start working through those, while also using assistance like medication or treatment and other counseling services.
You know, one of the keys for Alcohol Awareness Month this year is drawing attention to binge drinking. Are there any clues, Brad, for someone to know that something has gone beyond the social aspect of alcohol use into the disorder realm?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is if you have life interruptions that begin to occur, whether if you're a student and your schoolwork is lacking, you're calling in sick to work because you tied one on the night before, you get a DUI. Those kinds of things are major life interruptions. When those things start to occur, that's when an individual needs to start asking the question, is this getting too far away from me?
But we want people to know also that there is help when that happens.
Absolutely.
It's not just crisis time, but any time. So Kristen, how do people get in touch with Mirror Inc. and what kinds of things can you do?
So with getting in touch with Mirror Inc., the first thing would be calling our assessment center so that you can get an assessment, because that is how we know what level you are at and how we're able to get you the proper assistance. And the number is 316-867-0259 for our assessment, and then they'll get you into whichever treatment facility or status should not.
And Brad, there are two numbers there for Vallejo. Both are 24/7. What's the difference between your detox line and your crisis line?
Well, the crisis line is more about folks that are having mental health crises, okay? And that would be the line that they would call. If somebody is seeking to access our detox services, then that would be the 234-3448 number. And both of those are answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we have people there that'll talk to them, help them, try to figure out which direction they need to go and what needs to happen next.
Absolutely, and we will have that information on WIBW.com/hearmesee me. Kristen, Brad, thank you so much for starting the conversation.
Thanks for having us.
As always, you can find resources for addiction issues and other mental health related concerns on our special webpage, WIBW.com/hearmesee me. A lot of fantastic information is there. We wrap up with a great exhibit that's going to be opening at the Kansas Children's Discovery Center. The whole town of Topeka, of course, is preparing for the 70th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education U.S. Supreme Court ruling. It is crucial and critical, not just in our nation's history, but also in Topeka's history, since it involved the Topeka Public School District. A lot of activities are being planned for adults to observe the occasion, but the Kansas Children's Discovery Center realized that children should be part of the celebration as well. So they have an exhibit called Picture the Dream that will be opening, and it really brings these lessons home to younger people. Marty Hillard and Laura Burton from KCDC visited to tell us about it.
This is in partnership, Laura, correct, with the Brown versus Board anniversary. Why did you decide to do something to mark the occasion?
Exactly right. Well, of course, it's such an important event for our community and also for our nation. It's an opportunity for people to learn about what happened here in Topeka and how that fits into the overall narrative of what happened in the civil rights movement. We decided that picture books and children's picture books were a wonderful way for us as a children's museum that's really dedicated to play to get kids and families talking about these issues together. So Picture the Dream was a wonderful opportunity.
What is the exhibit not necessarily about, but how does it approach the topic, Marty?
Absolutely. So it approaches it through the lens of children's books. There's a wonderful collection that's curated by Andrea Davis Pinkney. And so this has been exhibited in a couple of different museums, but the idea is that it's children's books and beautiful illustrations. We were lent the rights to be able to reproduce it at our museum. And so just going from illustration to illustration and just telling the story of the civil rights movement through a lens that children can understand and identify with.
Is it, what will families do when they come in? Will they just sit down and read books together, or is there a narrative that's presented along with the book that you're able to foster the conversation?
Well, of course, because it's at the Kansas Children's Discovery Center, kids lead the way, right? So I think there are a number of different ways families might end up engaging with the exhibit. We have 70 beautiful art pieces. So I think that is the main thing that's going to attract families into the exhibit space, are these pieces that are beautiful and powerful and explore a whole range of different stories. After that, families will have the opportunity to enter a create space, and the creation space has been built in collaboration with local artists. So we have a few local artists that have created pieces for that, some of which are interactive. They have the opportunity to make their own art to add to the exhibit. They have the opportunity to explore and play with different manipulative toys and things that will help them understand what they've experienced. So a lot of different ways for families to engage depending on the age of their kids, the interest level of their kids, and how they want to start those conversations.
Certainly it's a big event. The 70th anniversary of Brown v. Board is a big event, but Marty, when you thought about why it was important for children to get involved in this specific message, regardless of the overall national importance of it, but just for the kids to learn this message, what was the thought process there?
Well, everything that we do at Kansas Children's Discovery Center, like Laura said, is child-led, child-based. And so for us, knowing that we already foster these opportunities for learning in so many cool and unique ways that resonate with children, it just made sense for us to also provide them with an experience to be able to celebrate Brown versus Board's 70th anniversary, but in a way, again, that just resonates with them. I believe that the history is still present with us. It's still living with us today. We've talked to so many different folks, partners, organizations who were a part of these first in the 20th century. And so for us, it's also a bridge back to the past, but making sure that children understand how the past informs the present and ultimately informs the future.
Well, it is a great concept and wonderful to bring the message, an important message to kids in a way they can understand. Picture the Dream, the story of the civil rights movement through children's books, will open May 3rd and run through August 11th. So all summer long families can see this. There is an open reception on May 1st, all at the Kansas Children's Discovery Center at Gage Park. Laura, Marty, thank you both for being here. Appreciate it.
That exhibit will be open through August, so lots of time to take a moment during summer vacation and check it out at the Kansas Children's Discovery Center, which is located in Gage Park in Topeka, Kansas. And a lot of activities are planned leading up to the 70th anniversary, which is coming up May 17th. We're going to be introducing you and letting you hear from some of those who were involved in that period of time in Topeka's history coming up throughout the month of May leading up to the big anniversary events. We were so glad you could join us. Remember, if you want to see the video from these segments and with all of our guests that you see on Eye on Northeast Kansas, you can find them on WIBW.com. Also on our WIBW 13 News YouTube channel. Be sure to click subscribe while you're there. And I also post them on my Facebook page, which is WIBW Melissa Bruner, along with our studio selfies so you can get a little bit of a behind the scenes look. Glad you could be along with us. Until next time, we'll see you on the red couch.